The fluorescent lights hummed in the pristine classroom, a steady, almost oppressive drone that mirrored the pressure pressing down on Carter Sterling's small shoulders. 10-year-old Carter sat at a polished oak desk, staring blankly at the crisp sheet of paper before him. A test, another test. The numbers, letters, and diagrams blurred together, a storm of symbols he couldn't make sense of. Every kid feared a bad grade, but for Carter, the fear ran deeper. He wasn't afraid of failing the test. He was afraid of disappointing the Sterling name. The name that carried billions, expectations, and an unspoken standard he could never measure up to. He traced the edges of the paper with his fingers, willing the answers to appear, imagining that perhaps the right numbers and letters were hiding somewhere, waiting for him to find them. The classroom was silent, except for the occasional cough and the scratch of pencils on paper. Carter's chest tightened as he remembered his mother's words from last night, repeated like a drumbeat in his mind. "Carter, excellence isn't optional. It's our legacy." A sharp click of a car door outside made him flinch. In moments, the door opened, and Evelyn Sterling entered with the precision and confidence of a storm in human form. Her black tailored coat flared slightly as she moved, her heels clicking against the polished floor like gunshots. She was 38, commanding, brilliant, a woman who had built a financial empire from steel, strategy, and sheer force of will. And yet, in her eyes, the fear of losing her son mirrored a grief she had long buried. Her husband was gone, a man who had believed in Carter's greatness. Now it was up to her to ensure that belief didn't fade. Evelyn's gaze fell on the test sheet. The red marks were harsh, jagged, unforgiving. A report card like this was a slap, an indictment. She felt her chest tighten, anger lacing the grief she had carried all these years. Tutors were already scheduled to descend upon the Sterling mansion, each an expert in their field, each expected to mold Carter into the boy he wasn't becoming. But Carter had heard it all before. He had endured the rehearsed pep talks, the glossy worksheets, the endless drills. Nothing had changed, not because he lacked intelligence, but because no one had ever taught him to love learning, only to fear failure. As Evelyn's heels faded from the classroom, Carter's mind wandered. He imagined a world far from the polished corridors, away from spreadsheets and school rankings. A place where curiosity was rewarded, where mistakes were maps and questions were keys. The thought sparked a faint warmth in his chest, an ember he hadn't felt in years. But the ember was fragile, easily smothered by the looming shadow of expectation. Later that night, after dinner, Carter wandered the quiet halls of his elite school. The corridors were empty, silent except for the distant hum of lights and the faint squeak of floor tiles under his shoes. He moved without purpose, or perhaps with a purpose he couldn't yet name, drawn by an unspoken pull toward a secluded wing of the school, where the janitor's closet smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and worn rubber. That was when he saw it. A whiteboard covered in intricate equations, spirals of numbers and symbols that seemed to dance across the surface. And at the board, a man he had never noticed, not really. Elias Flynn, the night janitor, mid-30s, tired but steady, his hair a little too long, sleeves rolled up over forearms dusted with chalk and cleaning residue. He moved with a quiet grace, scribbling, erasing, adjusting numbers with careful attention, as if the world itself depended on the solutions he traced with a marker. Carter's curiosity overpowered his hesitation. "What? What is that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias turned, surprised but not annoyed. His eyes softened when they met Carter's, recognizing a spark that no tutor had yet coaxed to life. He didn't correct him, didn't scold him for being there after hours. Instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and replied, "A story, if you like. Pirates hunting for treasure, astronauts exploring the stars, and these numbers, they're just the clues." Carter blinked. A story? Numbers as clues? For the first time in months, maybe years, his chest felt lighter. The fear was still there, lurking, but the ember had grown into a flicker, reaching toward something brighter, and as he leaned closer, peering at the maze of symbols, he realized he wanted to understand. Not for a grade, not for a legacy, but for the sheer joy of it. That night, a bridge formed between two worlds, one of privilege, burdened by expectation, and one of quiet resilience, tempered by loss and love. Carter didn't yet know that this encounter would change everything. That the janitor who cleaned floors and fixed toilets carried within him a secret that no tutor, no billionaire could ever provide. A secret that would teach Carter Sterling the one lesson money could never buy: the courage to truly love learning. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias scribbled another clue on the board, unaware that this small act would set into motion a journey that would challenge wealth, grief, and the very notion of what it meant to be brilliant. As Carter walked home that night, the moonlight glinting off the polished marble, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The school was silent under the cloak of night, halls empty except for the faint echo of Carter's sneakers on polished marble. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sterile reflections on the windows that framed the city's distant glow. For most, the building at this hour was nothing more than a quiet monument to academia. But for Carter Sterling, it had become a doorway into a world he never knew existed. He paused just outside the janitor's closet, heart pounding in anticipation and fear. Inside, Elias Flynn moved with deliberate calm, erasing numbers and scribbling new ones, the soft swish of the marker against the whiteboard, a rhythm of purpose and quiet genius. He was a man who carried the weight of the world in his eyes, but there was warmth there too, a subtle kindness that seemed to radiate without effort. Elias had the look of someone who had once been unstoppable, a prodigy whose intellect could have opened any door, but whose life had veered into quiet struggle. Carter noticed the lines at the corner of his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders, hints of a past shaped by sacrifice. Carter swallowed, unable to contain his curiosity. What is all this?" he asked, his voice hesitant but eager. Elias turned, giving Carter a measured look. "It's a puzzle," he said softly, leaning against the edge of the whiteboard. "But not the kind with answers you memorize. It's a story about explorers, about pirates hunting for treasure across the stars. Numbers are the clues, and the solution, well, that's where imagination comes in." Carter felt a spark, a flicker of fascination he hadn't felt in months. His mother's tutors had drilled formulas, equations, and theories into him, but they never came alive. They were chains, not keys. But here, in this quiet hallway with a janitor who spoke as if the universe itself was a playground, Carter felt the walls of fear and pressure begin to crumble. Elias noticed the change in Carter's posture, the way his eyes lingered on the board, tracing patterns as if searching for hidden worlds. He saw a boy who had everything in the material sense: wealth, opportunity, legacy, but lacked the one thing that mattered most: the freedom to explore, to fail, to wonder. "You know," Elias said, "I was once like you, brilliant enough to get into the best engineering programs, certain that my path was set. But life has a way of rewriting even the best plans." Carter tilted his head, curiosity piqued. "What happened?" Elias's eyes darkened for a moment, memories flickering across his face like shadows in the night. He had been 22, a young man with endless promise, when tragedy struck. An accident that left his wife gone and his world shattered. Suddenly, the future he had envisioned was replaced with the responsibility of raising Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, on his own. The dream of becoming a renowned engineer gave way to the practicalities of survival. A night janitor's shift, scraping together paychecks, keeping a roof over their heads. Yet even in those moments, Elias had not lost the spark. He had found a different path to genius, one forged in patience, empathy, and imagination. Carter felt a strange resonance with Elias's story. He, too, was trapped, though in a gilded cage of privilege rather than poverty. Every test, every failed grade, Every scolding look from his mother was a reminder that he was falling short of expectations he hadn't chosen for himself. And yet, here was a man who had lost everything and still found ways to teach, to inspire, to create joy from ordinary moments. Can you show me?" Carter asked, his voice almost a whisper, trembling with hope. Elias smiled, a soft, quiet smile that seemed to reach into the corners of Carter's doubt. "Of course. But only if you promise to play along. Learning is like treasure hunting. You have to be willing to get a little lost, to take risks, to imagine the impossible." From that moment, the classroom became a secret world. Carter would arrive under the guise of helping with trash rounds, sneaking past security cameras and empty halls, drawn by the thrill of discovery. Each session was a journey. Numbers became maps to hidden treasures, equations turned into codes for distant galaxies, physics problems transformed into rocket launches built from broom handles and imagination. Carter laughed for the first time in months, his brow no longer furrowed in anxiety but lifted in wonder. Elias, in turn, found a quiet joy in teaching a boy who reminded him of what he had once been. Not a student to grade, not a prodigy to mold, but a child to nurture, to guide, to believe in. In Carter, he saw the opportunity to give someone the gift he had almost lost forever. The courage to embrace curiosity, to love the pursuit of knowledge rather than fear it. Night after night, they worked together, the school hallways transforming into a realm of possibility. Carter's notebooks filled with sketches, diagrams, and imaginative annotations. He began to see the connections, the logic, the poetry behind numbers and theories. The fear that had once paralyzed him began to melt, replaced by fascination and determination. But beneath the quiet triumph, a shadow lingered. Carter knew instinctively that if anyone discovered these secret lessons, the fragile bridge they had built could crumble, especially his mother. Evelyn Sterling's world was one of control, of rules and expectations. The freedom and creativity Elias offered was alien, even threatening, to everything she valued. And yet, in those nights filled with laughter, wonder, and learning, Carter felt something he had not felt since his father's death. Alive. The chapter closed as Carter lingered in the hallway after a particularly challenging problem, staring at a constellation of numbers that now made sense. Elias watched him with quiet pride, aware that this was the beginning, not just of understanding math or science, but of transforming a boy's relationship with knowledge, confidence, and hope. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to whisper, "Some treasures aren't found in classrooms. They're discovered after hours, in secret worlds, guided by those who believe in you when everyone else has given up." The hallways of Sterling Academy had never felt more alive than they did under the quiet cloak of night. The polished floors reflected the soft glow of the exit signs, and shadows stretched long along the walls, creating secret passageways only Carter Sterling seemed to know existed. Each step he took toward the janitor's closet carried a thrill he could barely contain. The fear and pressure of the day melted into anticipation, a private excitement reserved for adventures that existed nowhere else. Elias Flynn was already waiting, marker in hand, standing before a whiteboard that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Tonight's lesson was different. The equations were scattered, swirling like a constellation, and Carter felt that familiar surge of curiosity that made his chest pound. He approached cautiously, pretending to heft a trash bag as if that justified his presence. The ruse was unnecessary. Elias never questioned why Carter came. He simply acknowledged it with a subtle nod, an invitation to explore. "What are we solving tonight?" Carter asked, eyes tracing the intricate lines Elias had drawn. Elias's smile was patient and knowing. "A challenge, a puzzle of gravity, speed, and imagination. But it's more than numbers. It's a story. Think of it as a rocket. And every calculation is a component you must build before launch. Miss one part, and the mission fails." Carter's mind, once clouded with anxiety and dread, now hummed with focus. He leaned closer, absorbing instructions as if they were spells and not equations. Each problem was framed as an adventure. Math became treasure maps, physics a blueprint for interstellar travel, history a dossier of secret agents navigating a dangerous world. The learning that once intimidated him now thrilled him. For the first time in years, success was not measured by a grade or a red mark on paper. It was measured by wonder, by understanding, by the spark of discovery that made his heart race. Night after night, Carter returned. The school corridors became a secret universe, the janitor's closet a launch pad to imagination. He learned not only numbers and formulas, but patience, creativity, and resilience. He saw how mistakes were not failures, but clues, and how persistence turned confusion into clarity. The rigid walls of privilege that had confined him began to crumble, replaced by a sense of possibility he had never been allowed to feel. Elias observed all of it quietly. He had been a mentor once, in another life, and the memory stirred something deep within him. Carter reminded him not only of his own younger self, but also of what had been lost in the years of sacrifice and grief. Teaching Carter wasn't about correcting mistakes. It was about restoring faith in the beauty of learning and in life itself. Meanwhile, Carter's transformation began to manifest in subtle ways during the day. He smiled more, laughed spontaneously, and carried a quiet confidence that made teachers and classmates do a double take. His mother, Evelyn Sterling, noticed it immediately, though she didn't understand the source. The change was palpable, but she assumed it was the result of the expensive tutors she had arranged. She didn't suspect the true architect of Carter's awakening was a man who scrubbed floors and emptied trash bins after hours. Elias shared glimpses of his life with Carter as well, stories of his daughter, Lily. And the sacrifices he had made were woven into lessons on logic and physics. He spoke of resilience, of rebuilding after loss, of finding joy in small victories. Carter absorbed it all, learning not only formulas and theorems, but the strength to face challenges, both academic and personal. The bond between the boy and the janitor deepened into something profound. Trust, respect, and a tentative father-son connection that neither had expected but both secretly longed for. Yet beneath the warmth and discovery, tension lingered. Carter knew that each night was a gamble. Discovery could undo everything: the trust, the progress, the freedom. Evelyn's sharp gaze and unwavering standards loomed in the background like a storm ready to break. Elias, too, was acutely aware of the fragility of their arrangement. One misstep, and the secret world they had built could vanish. One evening, after a particularly intense problem involving projectile motion and trajectory, Carter lingered by the whiteboard, tracing the lines of his solution. Elias stood behind him, quietly observing, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You've come a long way," Elias said softly. "But remember, the real challenge isn't the equations. It's believing in yourself when no one else does." Carter's eyes met his mentor's. In that moment, the boy understood. The lessons were never just about tests or grades. They were about courage, imagination, and heart. The spark that had been dimmed by fear was now a steady flame, illuminating possibilities he had never dared to imagine. As he left the school that night, Carter glanced back at the empty hallways, the whiteboard still gleaming under the dim lights. The world felt different now, larger, full of potential, and strangely safe despite the risks. He carried with him not just knowledge, but the confidence to use it. But as the shadows lengthened, a quiet worry gnawed at him. Secrets have a way of emerging, and the freedom he cherished was fragile. He knew that if his mother discovered his nightly lessons, the consequences could be severe. Yet the desire to learn, to explore, to grow, had taken root too deeply to ignore. And somewhere in the distance, the city lights blinked like distant stars, as if signaling that even the smallest journeys could lead to vast and unexpected discoveries. Carter didn't yet know what challenges lay ahead, but he felt ready. For the first time, he truly felt alive. Carter Sterling sat at his desk in the bright, bustling classroom, the noise of pencils scratching and chairs shifting filling the air. Yet, unlike before, the sounds no longer rattled him. He leaned forward, eyes sharp and focused, scanning the problems on the pop quiz in front of him. Numbers and symbols, once an intimidating blur, now made sense. Each equation was a challenge, a puzzle waiting to be solved, not a threat looming over his future. He took a deep breath, recalling the nights with Elias, the imaginative treasure hunts, rockets, and interstellar adventures turned lessons. As he began to work, a quiet thrill surged through him. Each correct calculation reinforced something far more valuable than a grade: belief in his own ability. The test, once a source of dread, became an arena for discovery. Carter's pencil moved steadily, confidently. With every answer, a weight lifted off his shoulders, replaced by exhilaration. His classmates glanced at him, curious, even envious, as he completed the quiz with a grace and understanding that had been absent for years. When the teacher collected the papers and handed back scores later that day, the room buzzed with surprise. Carter Sterling had aced the quiz. Murmurs swirled like an electric current. Evelyn, observing from her usual distant vantage point as she awaited the report, assumed it was the result of her meticulous selection of tutors, the best money could buy. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, oblivious to the truth behind the transformation. But Carter knew. He carried a secret gratitude, a quiet homage to Elias, the night janitor who had seen his potential and refused to let it fade. Each problem solved was a testament to the stories, the metaphors, the patience, and the unwavering belief that Elias had gifted him. Carter now craved more than repetition or memorization. He craved understanding. Elias, meanwhile, returned home each night to his modest apartment, greeted by Lily's bright, eager eyes. Teaching Carter had been a risk, but one he willingly embraced. Seeing Carter's growth mirrored the sacrifices he had made for his own daughter. He had given up his dreams to raise Lily, to provide a stable home, and yet, through these nightly lessons, he reclaimed a piece of the life he thought he had lost. Teaching Carter was not just about the boy. It was a healing of his own heart. One evening, Carter arrived at the school with a particularly challenging question in mind. He had worked tirelessly through the previous lesson and wanted to push the boundaries of his understanding. "Tonight," he whispered, "let's do something harder." Elias's eyes softened as he nodded. "Are you ready to take a leap?" he asked, the corners of his mouth lifting. Together, they tackled a complex problem involving angular momentum and force, translating it into a scenario of astronauts repairing a satellite mid-flight. Carter's imagination transformed abstract formulas into tangible experiences. His laughter punctuated the room, mingling with Elias's quiet chuckles, filling the empty hallways with warmth. As the lesson drew to a close, Elias shared more of his story. He spoke of his time in college, the dreams he had nurtured, and the moment they were abruptly replaced by responsibility and grief. Carter listened, absorbing not just the words, but the resilience, the courage, and the quiet dignity behind them. For the first time, Carter understood that life wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about rising after it, adapting, and finding meaning in every setback. Yet, beneath the joy, there was an unspoken tension. Carter's nightly excursions were a secret, fragile, and precious. Discovery could shatter everything. But for now, the risk was worth it. The breakthroughs, the understanding, the sense of empowerment, they were real, tangible, and transformative. Carter's fear was fading, replaced by a sense of possibility he had never experienced before. The parallel between their lives became strikingly clear to both. Carter, the boy weighed down by privilege and expectation, and Elias, the man burdened by loss and sacrifice, were each learning from the other. One taught the other resilience. One taught the other curiosity. Both learned the value of hope. And then, the pivotal moment arrived. Carter, confident and inspired, attempted a problem he had once deemed impossible. He paused, took a deep breath, and with steady hands, worked through it step by step, recalling the stories Elias had told. the metaphors that had made learning an adventure. And finally, the solution emerged, elegant, complete, and entirely his own. Carter's chest swelled with pride, not just for the answer, but for the journey it represented. He understood now that success wasn't about wealth, tutors, or even talent. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to engage fully with the world. And as he packed his things that night, preparing to leave the hallways that had become his secret kingdom, he felt a quiet, profound gratitude for the man who had guided him there. In the stillness of the night, with the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor, Carter Sterling realized something fundamental. Real breakthroughs weren't measured in grades alone. They were measured in courage, in curiosity, and in the belief that someone, sometimes a stranger, sometimes a janitor, could see potential where everyone else saw failure. And somewhere, far above the city, the stars shone like the beginnings of new adventures, a promise that with guidance, imagination, and heart, the impossible could become possible. The crisp autumn evening cast long shadows across Sterling Academy, the hallways eerily silent except for the soft echoes of Carter's footsteps. He had stayed late again, poring over a new set of equations with Elias, immersed in a challenge that transformed complex physics into rockets, pirates, and distant galaxies. Every scribble on the whiteboard was a piece of a story he could finally understand and shape himself. The thrill of discovery coursed through him like electricity, a sensation he had not felt in years. But tonight, the delicate balance of secrecy was about to shatter. As Carter leaned over the whiteboard, tracing the arc of an imagined rocket trajectory, the sound of hurried footsteps and the distinctive click of a polished heel froze him in place. Evelyn Sterling stood at the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief and fury. The black coat she always wore seemed darker under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her gaze, sharp and unyielding, cut through the quiet like a blade. Carter's heart thumped in panic. He hadn't expected her to come here, not tonight, not ever. The protective cocoon of secrecy had been breached. His chest tightened as he struggled to explain, to justify the hours he had spent learning, to convey the excitement and understanding that had finally awakened inside him. But words failed him. Evelyn's eyes were fixed on Elias Flynn. Standing quietly beside the whiteboard, marker in hand, his expression calm yet wary. Misinterpretation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. To her, it seemed like a man manipulating her son, twisting his mind with games and distractions. The fear of scandal, of someone undermining her child's education, overwhelmed her grief and pride. Without hesitation, she called the school board, her voice sharp and commanding, reporting an inappropriate relationship between the janitor and her son. By morning, the consequences were swift and merciless. The board, fearful of the public backlash and legal entanglements, acted decisively. Elias was terminated immediately. His key to the secret world of knowledge he had built for Carter was gone. Carter's pleas fell on deaf ears. He tried to explain the lessons, the discoveries, the transformation, but Evelyn and the board had already made up their minds. The fragile sanctuary of after-hours learning collapsed around him. Elias left quietly, a stoic figure bearing the weight of loss. He didn't argue, didn't resist. His priority was Lily, his daughter, and the stability he had fought to preserve for her. Each step away from the school was heavy, each breath tinged with sorrow, knowing that he was leaving behind a boy who had come to mean as much to him as his own daughter. Carter stood in the empty hallway, staring at the whiteboard, the remnants of equations and stories he had come to cherish. The silence screamed at him, echoing with the absence of laughter, curiosity, and understanding. He felt abandoned, betrayed by the very world that was supposed to nurture him. The fear that had haunted him for so long returned with renewed intensity, amplified by grief and frustration. He thought of Evelyn, of her high expectations and relentless drive. She had tried to protect him, to push him toward excellence. But in doing so, she had almost destroyed the one thing that made learning meaningful. Carter's heart ached, not with anger alone, but with the deep sorrow of realizing that the connection he had found with Elias had been severed, seemingly forever. Yet even in despair, a quiet determination began to take root. Carter knew that the lessons, the spark, the understanding he had gained, these were his now. No board decision, no parental misunderstanding could erase what he had internalized. He began to see that Elias's teachings were more than formulas. They were tools for life, lessons in resilience, creativity, and courage. As Carter sat in the empty classroom, the moonlight streaming through the windows, he made a silent vow. He would honor the mentorship he had received. The equations on the whiteboard were more than homework. They were a testament to belief, patience, and the transformative power of connection. He realized that proving himself would not be about pleasing his mother or fulfilling her expectations, but about demonstrating the confidence, skill, and heart Elias had nurtured in him. And somewhere in the distance, Carter could almost hear the quiet voice of Elias, guiding him one last time. Believe in yourself when no one else does. That is where true learning begins. The hallway, once a haven of discovery, now felt like a challenge he had to confront alone. But Carter, with a heart still brimming with hope and determination, understood that the story was far from over. The secret mentorship may have ended, but the lessons, the courage, and the confidence it had instilled were alive, and they were his to wield. As he closed the door behind him, Carter looked out at the city beyond the school walls, the lights twinkling like distant stars. He knew the next chapter was coming, and when it did, he would face it not as a boy crippled by expectation, but as a young mind armed with the kind of wisdom that no money or privilege could ever buy. The auditorium buzzed with tension, a low hum of anticipation vibrating through the polished floors and tiered seating. Sterling Academy had organized its annual STEM showcase, a spectacle of intellect and innovation attended by parents, investors, educators, and the media. Carter Sterling sat backstage, his heart pounding, palms sweaty and mind racing. This was the moment everyone expected him to fail, a boy who had struggled, who had been considered a lost cause. Yet tonight, armed with knowledge, imagination, and courage instilled by Elias Flynn, he felt something entirely different. Readiness. He glanced at the whiteboard he had secretly recreated backstage. Equations and diagrams meticulously arranged, a map of the intellectual journey he had undertaken. Each symbol was a reminder of nights spent with Elias, of pirates, rockets, and interstellar missions transformed into lessons in physics, strategy, and problem-solving. Carter's chest swelled with pride and quiet gratitude. He wasn't here to impress his mother or the board. He was here to honor the man who had believed in him when no one else did. The lights dimmed and the audience's murmurs hushed. Carter stepped onto the stage, eyes scanning the expectant faces. The challenge before him was formidable, a complex physics problem, one that had stumped older students and seasoned tutors alike. The tension was palpable, and whispers of doubt rippled through the crowd. Even Evelyn Sterling, seated in the front row, radiated anxiety, her sharp gaze fixed on her son. She believed, as everyone did, that failure was inevitable. Carter took a deep breath, centering himself. He recalled Elias's words. Believe in yourself when no one else does. That is where true learning begins. And with that, he began. The numbers no longer intimidated him. The equations spoke in a language he understood. He visualized the scenario as a mission. Astronauts repairing a satellite in orbit, pirates seeking treasure, rockets hurtling through space. Each calculation was a step in the story, a problem solved not just by intellect, but by creativity and imagination. Minutes passed, each one stretching with suspense. Carter worked methodically, confidently, translating abstract formulas into tangible solutions. The audience watched in awe as the once failing boy demonstrated clarity, insight, and precision that few could match. Murmurs of disbelief swelled into murmurs of admiration. Carter's fingers moved deftly over the notes, the whiteboard, and his mental map of the challenge, weaving together knowledge and intuition. Finally, he paused, heart hammering, and presented the completed solution. A silence fell over the auditorium, thick and heavy, as the audience processed what they had witnessed. Then came the eruption, applause, cheers, and stunned gasps. Carter's classmates stared in disbelief. Educators whispered excitedly. Even the investors leaned forward, captivated by the display of ingenuity and courage. And then Carter did something unexpected. He stepped forward, gaze sweeping over the crowd, and said, voice clear and unwavering, "I didn't do this alone. The person who taught me to see learning as an adventure, who believed in me when no one else did, is Elias Flynn, the janitor who changed everything for me." A ripple of astonishment moved through the audience. Cameras flashed, microphones captured the declaration, and whispers turned into headlines. Evelyn's eyes widened, a mixture of shock, guilt, and dawning understanding washing over her. She had been so focused on control, on grades, on appearances, that she hadn't seen what really mattered: connection, trust, and the courage to embrace curiosity. Later that evening, as the story spread across news outlets, the board and public were forced to reconsider their judgment. Elias was approached with an unexpected opportunity to lead a foundation dedicated to providing educational mentorship for underprivileged children. His expertise, compassion, and innovative methods finally recognized and celebrated. Carter returned home, exhilarated and triumphant, but not alone. Lily met him with wide-eyed curiosity, and he introduced her to his mentor. Together, they formed an unusual but harmonious family, bridging worlds that had seemed irreconcilable: wealth and struggle, privilege and resilience. Evelyn, watching them interact, allowed herself to grieve her husband properly and to embrace the family she still had, realizing that true legacy was not wealth, but love, guidance, and belief in one another. In the final scene, Carter, Elias, and Lily gathered in the backyard, a model rocket in hand. With a countdown, they launched it into the night sky, watching as it soared, a brilliant streak of light against the darkness. The rocket carried with it dreams, second chances, and the enduring truth that sometimes the greatest teachers are found not in classrooms or boardrooms, but in the quiet belief of someone who simply refuses to give up on you. Carter stood with a smile, heart full, understanding that failure was never the enemy. Fear was never the barrier. Connection, curiosity, and courage were, and tonight, those had triumphed.